Hi there, everybody. Happy March. Oh my gosh, it's March in Colorado and the snow is falling. We're having a great time
coming.
today. We're so glad that you joined us. Jordan and Sarah are here, and we have a great guest. But I'm going to let Sarah introduce our guest, but it's going to be a great time. So welcome to the MNC Move the Stairs Friday conversation, where we share CBD brand protection strategies for your CBD business, really to tackle some of your biggest PR concerns and public relations challenges. And we're so excited to chat with you if you're joining us live today. And if you're joining us after the broadcast or on the podcast, we're glad you're here, and you can always send us your questions. We'd love to get them. Right, Sarah?
Well, that's absolutely right. So welcome, Wayne. How are you?
I'm doing really well. Thank you for having me on. Excited to be here.
Thank you for joining us. So as Diane mentioned, this March 2021, our theme is putting the spring in your brand protection PR. And this week, we're talking about planting the seeds of growing your business, growing your brand protection. And one great tactic is starting your own podcast. And that's why we invited you on today. So we're talking to CBD business owners, and you are so well known throughout the industry. So as we're so grateful to have you on as our special guest. Wayne, if you don't know Wayne Schwind, he's the owner of Periodic Caramels and host of the podcast Periodic Effects, and also has the new website periodicsearch.com, the world's best search engine for video and audio cannabis education. Did I get all of that? I mean, you have your fingers in so many pies, Wayne.
Yeah.
And we're going to get into a bunch of those details and ask you a whole bunch of questions about that. And so really the purpose of this podcast is to talk about planting those seeds of CBD brand protection PR, potentially with a podcast. And by the end of this episode, I hope everyone listening will be able to evaluate if podcasting is a great tactic for your CBD brand protection PR plan. And I hope everyone will be able to come away with some fabulous tips on how to produce a podcast and make it work for you.
Yeah, and we're fortunate enough to have Wayne for all 30 minutes of our episode today. So what we'll do is what we typically do, break it down into 3 10-minute sections. In the first 10 minutes, we're going to be talking about how to evaluate if a podcasting is right for you and right for your business. Then for the second 10 minutes, we're going to talk about some strategies and what you'll need, how much it's going to cost, and maybe and more importantly, how much time it's going to take. And Wayne's been doing this for quite a number of years now, so he'll be able to shed some light on that. And then finally, we'll deep dive in what to expect from all of your efforts. We're going to pick Wayne's brain and have him, tell us what results he has seen and what expectations maybe he set as he started getting going with the podcast.
So if you're joining us live, just please jump into the conversation by answering this question. Do you currently produce a podcast? If not, do you listen to podcasts, and which ones do you like? And of course, everyone at MNC listens to Periodic Effects because we know what a great podcast that is, and we think you should too. So check that one out. And in the comments section, let us know what you think. And if you're joining us later, remember, you can always post your questions. We'll answer them. So we're looking forward to hearing what you think about podcasting and whether it might be a tactic that you would be interested in.
Yep. And as always, we've got a free downloadable one sheet. You can grab that at movethestairs.com. So let's get right into it. Should I start a podcast?
It's a commitment, right?
Question.
Yeah, it's something that you really have to put in some time and effort to. And, it can be a great way to build your own brand and create a loyal following by sharing your expertise. And that's, of course, one of the things that we tout to be a key to CBD brand protection PR. It's building your thought leadership and reputation. That goes a really long way in helping you to navigate some challenges or even crisis situations may occur at your company or within the CBD industry. And remember, if something negative does happen in the industry, your customers are going to look to you to provide some leadership, guidance, and maybe that insight that they may not know on the surface. And if you've already engaged your CBD brand in this, that's a key component to brand protection, right, Diane?
Absolutely. So Wayne, we're going to stop yammering here in just a second, but let me just give real quick facts. 30% of Americans, more than 100 million a month, listen to podcasts in 2020. And that increase in listenership is up 54% in the past 3 years, according to Edison Research and Triton Digital. So I would like you to know why you decided that podcasting should be one of the main components of your brand protection PR.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm excited to dive into all this because there's a lot of different angles you can take it, a lot of different opportunities and stuff you discover just by starting that you don't even realize how it's going to end up. And I think to start, it was it wasn't so much specifically the podcast, but that we had to build an audience that knew us directly, that we owned that platform. Social media is great. You can build an audience there, but you can see a lot of your organic reach just disappear when they change strategies. So it was always how to build an audience that knew us. And for us, we built our company. I bootstrapped it and self-financed it. So every marketing strategy we looked at was what's the lowest cost,
Right.
but takes like sweat equity and just put in the time and offer value that way. And that was really why we picked the podcast, because it was like $300 in equipment to get started. I mean, almost nothing. And then kind of started there, and it's evolved over time. But it's definitely opened up a lot of different doors. And at first it was really just a marketing strategy to build an audience for our edible product business that we have. Yeah.
And we love your caramels. They are just outstanding.
Oh, you've tried them?
God.
Thank you.
Oh, are you kidding me? They're in my, yes, they just melt in my mouth just about every day. So, Sarah?
So Wayne, talk about, I mean, you mentioned that you bootstrapped this, and that I think is a really, sort of typical way that people get into podcasting. Did you consider other methods of outreach when you started, or you mentioned that you had listened to podcasts for years? I mean, was that just a natural fit for you? What drew you to podcasts?
It was weird because I never had any background in like media or anything like that. I did do sales before I started the company. So it's kind of, talking with customers, and the podcast we looked at a lot of different things, and we had social media and different accounts going like that. But the podcast was the one that was unique. And I thought, if people would listen to this, like, what other business do you know the owner? Have you heard the owner talk for 10 hours or 100 hours with how many episodes we have now? So I knew it could develop a deep connection. And it was something I like because now we do video with it. But at first it was just audio. So I was way less nervous to record my.
Oh, I think we froze.
Oh, he'll be back in a second.
He'll be back in a second,
but
yes.
you know what? I
voice,
understand.
I could look like whatever.
Yeah. We lost you there for a second. You're going in and out, but you're good. You're back now. So you were just saying that, but then you went to video, but it was more, it concerns you a little more. Is that right?
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Think about it a little bit more, definitely. But that channel was it made sense for us because I liked the content too. Having a guest on, you don't have to sit there and think of like talk by yourself to create a video or something. The guest, it's natural conversation. I did sales, so I kind of had that communication, asking questions. And it made sense for our science focus and the educational piece. And we found over time, really, we have pretty much fully a B2B audience. We have some consumers that listen, but the bud tenders and dispensaries and all those buying, decision makers really listen to it. And that's where I think it's really like found our niche in the industry and has really helped us grow. Because those people recommend products, they decide what to put on the shelf. And so if you got the relationship with them, that goes a really long ways.
You know what I think is so interesting, as I was listening to one of your podcasts this morning on the treadmill, is I feel like podcasting is such an kind of an intimate medium. I mean, I've got my headphones on and I'm kind of in a zone because I'm on the treadmill, and there's sort of the kids are getting up and moving around the house, getting off to school. But I wonder, is that a way that you feel like you really are able to develop that one-on-one relationship? I mean, you mentioned the bud tenders and the business owners and the various people. Do you find that you really have developed a community and that relationship almost with however many thousands of individuals who might listen to your podcast?
Yeah, definitely. It's kind of weird sometimes when I walk into a store. We have certain stores that we're in that like play it in the background while in their shop where customers shop.
Oh my
And those
gosh.
bud tenders really know us. And so it's weird walking in there because like they listen to they'll say stuff about me and I'm like, have I told? And I forget that I just mentioned things in passing, so they feel like they know you really well. Yeah, it's been huge. And I think also because I'm an operator and I'm running the business and I talk to bud tenders. So like I'll have a conversation with one of them and then I'll bring it up on the podcast and talk about what we discussed. So I think because it's a great platform, but if you get on as just, interview experts or you're not actually doing the thing you're talking about and you want to get in that way, it's harder because it is very noisy and loud. I mean, there's tons of podcasts. So you do have to bring some kind of value or why would they stick around and listen? But yeah, I think it's been a huge way to connect, develop that relationship.
That is so cool. And a little bit later, I just want to let everybody know that we're going to be talking about, I think that there's tremendous value. And one of the things that we know about brand protection is being able to measure that value. And so we're going to get into some specifics on that, which is really wonky and exciting to me. So we're gonna talk about that. But you've been doing a podcast since 2017, which is, it's hard to believe, kind of the dawn of the podcasting era a little bit. How have things changed in the time that you've been doing it?
I think it's been, well, the podcasting category has grown. Now everyone, like if you say we have a podcast, almost, unless like my grandma kind of struggled to get it onto her phone, but everyone can access it. So that's developed more. And probably just what we learned over time, not so much like podcasting itself. That's kind of the same process, getting a guest on. We've added more segments. So I do like some standalone episodes, which I'll record on my own time without a guest. And if we're short an episode that week and we don't have a guest lined up, it's nice because we commit to a weekly episode. So we want consistency there. And then we added video. And the biggest thing I think is we've discovered you can create so much new content from one episode. And I don't do that work. So it's a YouTube video, but you can cut that into clips, which can be 60-second Instagram. But you can make 20, 30 pieces of good content from one guest episode. And if you've got a team that does that, we've been developing that over time. So I think that's the biggest thing that is changed, just adding more onto it. I
really want to highlight that particular thing for anyone who's watching or listening, that idea that it's not just one standalone piece of content, that you have one thing that you've created and then you've got the video out of it and then you cut that video down and then you put that on your social media. That is such a smart, strategic approach to leveraging the content that does take time and does take cost to produce. And I just really want to highlight that because that is such a smart way to go about it. Yeah. Yeah, it's hard. Figuring out content is difficult, I think, for a lot of people because you sit down with a blank page and then you start. But you create a podcast, like the guest, it kind of starts developing itself. It makes it a lot easier. And it kind of forces you into starting it and following through with it versus sitting down and trying to create, some big master plan from scratch. Yeah.
I just want to jump in really quick too for people who are tuning in. If you have a question for Wayne, by all means, drop it in the comments and we're happy to pull that up on the screen and pass that along.
Yeah.
Yeah, we love that. Julie has joined us earlier and she said her experience on podcasts has been great. It gives me, I think I can even pop this into there we go. Oh, Jordan did it and then I undid it. Yeah, she says it absolutely gives me more credibility and people get to know me when they listen, which is such a great, I mean, Wayne, you talked about that, when you walk into a shop and people are like, they know your voice or they've heard that conversation before. I think that's just so powerful. And it sounds like you mentioned your grandmother, Wayne, the the downloadable one sheet that we have that's available on movethestairs.com mentions our grandmothers. And so you'll have to go get that sheet to understand why. But, I love that we're talking about our grandmas in a CBD and periodic caramels podcast.
It's a good fit. If I could throw one more thing in there too, it's not just the audience you create, which is the huge piece, but I've done now over 200 guests that are business owner, like higher level people that I've been able to call. Like my personal network inside the industry is 100 times bigger than it would have been without. So you develop your own internal business really benefits just from creating those relationships, which you would never created without a reason to sit down and do it, like a podcast.
That is so, I think that's one of the great things about it. It's a great business development. It's a great way to network. I mean, so there's a lot of reasons why you would spend the time and the money on doing it, because there, and as you said, you chop up the material that you do and you can reuse that so many different ways. So our podcast is called Move the Stairs. And Wayne, you may not know why it's called Move the Stairs, and some of our listeners don't, but Move the Stairs is all about taking whatever life gives you and making the most out of it, and really not whining about if only this or if only that, but saying, okay, what can I do? And it comes from, I was a producer and I walked in and it was election night, and there was a candidate who was incumbent. And so we knew he was going to win. But when I walked in, I knew I had to get his interview first. And the stairs from the podium led to my competition. So I went over, I looked at the stairs, I literally unscrewed them, moved them to the other side. We got him that night, and Move the Stairs was born.
Devious.
That's right. And it is
Just
our
hope your competitors don't listen to the podcast and pick up that strategy.
Exactly. So whatever's going on in your life, especially during COVID, man, did we have to move the stairs during COVID? But anyway, it's really important to move the stairs. So Jordan, you've got the next question.
Yeah. So Wayne, you already kind of touched on this earlier in the conversation about when you first got started with your podcast. You said, it cost you like $300 to get the equipment that you needed to get rocking and rolling. So my question is, over time, how have you seen things change between the first initial time investment that you put into your podcast to, where you are now in 2021?
I put less time into it now just because I really had to figure out the whole thing from the beginning. So I have a team, but whenever we do something new, I normally go figure it out myself and develop it. And then I'll create the system around it that I can give. Like I record a lot of video SOPs where I just record myself doing the thing, like editing the podcast and how to finish it for production. And I can give that. I have people that aren't even from marketing that have learned to edit podcasts or even edit a video. To make it really simple that way. But this is still the same mic that the very first one, the same arm. So like my equipment is still the same. Costs really haven't went up there. The thing now is, I just have a team that does post-production and also getting guests, doing some research. So my time per week, like if I'm doing one guest episode per week, it's like I probably spend 2 hours on it, an hour for the interview, 30 minutes maybe getting ready and kind of prepping. But I know the industry really well too, so I don't really have to prep much. If I had to learn more, I'd probably need more time up front. And I did early on. But once you get a rhythm down, it really starts, like it becomes streamlined, just like a normal thing.
I love listening to your podcast because you really listen to what your guest is saying. And you riff off of that so beautifully, and you're answering the questions that I'm thinking of. I listen in the car. That's the podcast.
Yeah.
And I'm immediately thinking, well, what about this? And man, you're right there with that question. And I think that's one of the keys to really having a successful podcast. Do you have other advice for people who are starting a podcast?
Yeah. Don't do it because you want to just build an audience or sell more product, because it probably you won't be able to figure it out. Like I really enjoy the science. Like my background is in science, so I enjoy these topics and I enjoy the guests I talk to. So I think that's why it feels natural. Like if we weren't recording, I'd still want to talk to this person for an hour. But pick something that you're very interested in and figure out a format. Like it doesn't have to be a guest interview that you plan I've got a new idea we're going to try in our company. I'm going to record our marketing meetings with the team. And then we might pull like 5 or 10 minute chunks where we're not discussing something personal, internal about the company, but a market trend. It's like, we're doing this meeting anyways, and now it's over Zoom. So it's even easier to record. That could be content that's just sitting there. And there's a lot of different things. So maybe that's your system. Like you got to create the system, make sure it's something you'll keep repeating, because the consistency is the most important. If it's one-off and it's not predictable, people won't keep coming back to it. So that's a big part of it.
We need to talk to you about that because we actually have a client that we just did a conference for. We did one last year as well, and we pulled sound from the conference and made podcasts out of the sound. Sarah put them together, and that was fascinating. So I want to again reach out to our audience and ask them to tell us how much time and money you've invested in your podcast, or if you haven't started a podcast, I'm interested. Do you think it would be worth the time and money? We know how busy everybody out there is. And when you're trying to build a business, you're working serious hours. So everything that you make a decision with your brand protection PR, it has to pay off. And so I'd love to know what you think about that. How much time do you think it would be worth it? Jordan?
Thanks, Diane. And we also wanted to look ahead to next week as well, where you can join us on our Move the Stairs conversation. We're going to shift or continue our trend and talk about growing, pun intended, with spring and investing for the future, or the discussion about new financing and technology in the CBD space and how you can take some of this information and use it to build your CBD brand protection PR opportunities. I know that's a lot to dissect. So if you have any questions, feel free to email us and we'll be happy to bring that up and address it next week.
And I just want to say, we are talking to an Irish CBD company, Greenheart CBD. And since it's St. Patrick's Day week and my last name is Mulligan, and actually Sarah came up with a great idea, you're going to have a little lilt and a brogue when you're listening to the podcast next week. So we're excited about that.
So tune in just to listen. That'll
exactly.
be fun. So Wayne, I made something for you this morning because I was so impressed. I think that you deserve the first ever certificate of Move the Stairs certificate of achievement presented to Wayne Schwind for exemplary performance in owned. There goes my dog knocking around my computer. Owned media amplification using periodicsearch.com. Now, this I want to talk about a little bit because this section here, we want to talk about measurable business objectives. And you just mentioned that you have to really enjoy what you're doing because you don't necessarily see a correlation between, podcasts and sales or other things. But because we really specialize in ROI and measurement, I think that the way you use periodicsearch.com in concert with the podcast, in concert with your product sales through your website is just brilliant. And we call that owned media because you own the podcast, you own the websites, you own all that material. And it develops what we call thought leadership. And that's just such a main component of brand protection that people hear you in their heads. They know who you are. They've listened to your expertise. They can go search information on periodicsearch.com. So please, if you could explain what periodicsearch.com is, let's start there.
Yeah, I think we launched that only like 4 or 6 months ago. And basically I found, so someone I followed for a while is Gary Vaynerchuk. And that was kind of, he gave a lot of advice. I mean, he kind of made himself famous by making his own content and YouTube and podcasts. That's was kind of inspiration for the podcast. He has a search engine that I found, or he was talking about, where you can basically search for anything he said in the past. And so it was useful for me because I was typing CBD, because he sometimes hits on that stuff. And once we had enough episodes, it was like, we have enough of a database that would be great to have for us. And we also get listeners that are like, I have this specific question, and we might have covered it a year ago with a doctor, but I don't know where it's at in an episode or how to find it. It's very hard to find past content and discover, old stuff. So it just all made sense to tie together with our science focus, bud tender education, and kind of like a main area to send someone that's simple and won't be too overwhelming, hopefully, when they arrive, because we do make a lot of different science content and business content, and knowing where to send someone's kind of difficult. So I think that's a good headquarters for us now.
Well, and I want to share the screen. We're all going to squunch down and be barely visible on the side, but here's how it works. I mean, I've just typed in Delta 8 and, that's going to return. I don't know that I searched it correctly. No, it was there earlier. So we'll just We're just going to try that search again. But when I searched in earlier, and I could be having problems with my internet, it's amazing what gets returned here. And
I searched migraines this morning because someone asked me about CBD and migraines. And that came back. I don't know. There were like 20 different podcasts that came back that talked about that, which was really cool. And I was able to share that with a client, which was even better. That I could say, yeah, this is what's out here right now. So that's very cool.
Yeah. And so this is an example of using the media that you create. So it returns your own podcasts, your own videos, and drives people toward content that you've already created, reminds them, drives home your expertise, the fact that you've been doing this for quite some time. And I will just say it's an absolutely beautiful interface. And you mentioned it at the top of your podcast. You mentioned it on your podcast page. How did you come up with this strategy to sort of pull all of this content together in this way?
It just kind of happened like every brand. So we have 4 different brands. Everything's like under periodic, and everyone was just built after the other one later. Like none of them were planned ahead of time. So the first one was like an organ and cannabis, then the podcast, then hemp, periodic caramels, the CBD line, and then the periodic search. And you just keep like when you're operating in the industry and you're talking to people, you see like issues that need to be solved. And then you're like, well, I've already been doing this work. Like, can I adjust it or fit it to this new need? And you just discover things like by doing the podcast and talking to so many different people. And there's no like platform, like our search engine, when you click it, it also goes to the middle of the video where what you're searching for is being said.
That's what I noticed about Delta 8. When I searched that, it went right to that section of the video, which is so useful and really, really professional.
Yeah. And I think there's a huge internal. I'm surprised this tool is not more widely out there, because we do a lot of, like I said, the videos we make internally for training. Like we have our own intranet with like all of our SOPs, documents, trackers. I haven't done it yet, but I want to build this search engine for our own team internally. So like a new hire starts, they can type something in and find a video like doing the tasks they're doing. It could really speed up like training and just your own team's ability to execute too.
That's a great approach.
It is. It's a fabulous approach. But I'm interested, when you started the podcast, what was your objective and how did you measure it? And I want you to put this in the context of, there's more than 1.7 million podcasts out there, but they say that about 50% of them will fail. And I found that, anecdotally, we know that it takes about a year to really get the podcast up, which is, 52 weeks of production, and you're still waiting to see, is there going to be somebody who's going to comment? Is there going to be somebody who's going to download? How did you get through that? Because when you started back in 2017, I'm wondering if it was even longer than a year.
Well, I think there's 2 lanes for a podcast. There's people that start a podcast to try to make money off it, or they're a YouTube channel to make money off it. And then there's people that have a business and the podcast is added on. Like I don't make money from the podcast. So it's not really like there's no deadline for it to fail. But if I'm like quit my job and this got to make money in 6 months, it puts you in a hard situation. Yeah. And you don't think as well either, because you're thinking money and not value to your audience, why are they going to stick around if it's not worth it to them? So I just started, and I just thought, podcasting was already proven. It wasn't like an industry like the internet. Like it's not a fad. It's not going away. And I just knew I could keep repeating it. It would help us internally. But this podcast never like took off. Like it was for the first 3 to 6 months, like 50, 100 listeners per episode we got up to. And then a year later, it was like 300, 400. And right now we get like 1,500 to 2,000
Which
listeners.
Is great, by the way. That is really good listenership.
And very B2B focused too. So it's kind of that niche audience that, there are people that we're working with, and it just kind of slowly, incrementally just keeps going. If I had to live off this, I'm 3 years into it, this would have failed. Like this podcast wouldn't work on its own right now. We have talked to sponsors. I think it actually could potentially now start creating revenue, but I don't really need it to. But that's the hardest part. If you're trying to make this your thing to pay your bills, it's going to be hard. But if it's the extra marketing piece, I think this is the easiest marketing that requires the least amount of time for any business owner, especially if you've got a team and money, you can build a production team that can make it all. And I think it's even more important for small businesses, although it's harder at first because you don't have money for mass advertising. Like this is the only way you can really build a brand with almost zero, no money basically to start. Yeah.
I think those are great points and a good reason for you, if you decide to start one or if you're in the middle of one, hang in there because you will get to the right audience. So I just want to briefly recap today's chat and Wayne, thank you so much. We talked about how to evaluate if podcasting is something you should start. We talked about strategies you'll need and how much it'll cost and maybe, you like that? Maybe the most important thing is how much time it will take. And then we just talked about what to expect from your efforts and how to measure your podcast impact. I think all that is very important.
Well, thank you, Wayne, so much. We really, really appreciate your time today. Wayne Schwind of Periodic Caramels.
Thank you for having me on. It was really fun. Those are great questions.
Thanks.
Well, and if you have time, I want you to go check out periodicsearch.com and do your own search, really dig into some of his fantastic content. Thank you so much for joining us on this week's Move the Stairs episode. We're here to help you protect your CBD business with brand protection PR. And I don't know that anybody does it better than Wayne of Periodic Caramels. Thanks so much.
Have a great
you.
weekend.
Thank you very much. You guys as well. Thank you.